And we are live. As I said, thank you very much for joining the first of the Writers Guild of Great Britain's 5-panel Festival of Game Writing, Getting Started and Staying In, How to Start and Build a Career in Game Narrative. The chat will be off, but you may ask questions to the panel via the Q&A button at the bottom. That will come straight through to myself and to the chair, and then we'll put those to the panelists if we get a little bit of time later on. You can also see, as I scroll through, that we have some information there on the Writers Guild of Great Britain. You can see our video games guidelines that give advice to anyone working in games narrative or with writers. You'll also find those links in the panel. Now, the Writers Guild of Great Britain is a TUC registered and affiliated union. We represent writers across TV, film, theatre, comedy, books, animation, radio, and of course, video games. We were the first in the world to have a video games committee. And together we've done a number of things to represent games writers, including the games guidelines, which have been out serving writers across the globe for more than a decade. We are currently in the process of revising these. So if you would like to help shape the industry as we go forward, please do complete the survey, which you'll find the link for there and also in the emails. And that information will help us get a good picture of the information. There's special surveys for those working in game narrative, for students and for employers. And we would value all of your thoughts and input into there. The union is here for events. We supply support, contract vetting, networking, and we can also give you advice both on the games industry and other media. The central union is run by full-time staff and also volunteers. So that's the point where I can then stop the share and potentially start to appear. It's also run by volunteers, such as myself. So my name's Andrew Walsh. I'm a full-time writer with over 85 games credits to my name. And I know that most of you have joined in just to see what we've all got on our bookcases. So I've made sure that my camera is pointed away just so that I don't embarrass myself. This is our first of our online events, so we're busy learning how we work through. And this is part of what the Guild is there for. Writing can be a very lonely and isolating profession. It can be hard to get information. It can be hard to know where to go and where to get help. So the union is here to provide exactly that. Without further ado, I will hand you over to the chair to begin our panel. I will pop in at the end just to give some more information, and I hope that you enjoy the evening.
Hello there. Andy unmuted me just as I unmuted myself, so I then got remuted, going off to an amazing start over here. Welcome everybody to this first of the 5 sessions for this week. The topic that we're going to be talking about today is getting started and staying in, how to start and build a career in game narrative. I've got a load of questions that I'm going to be asking these panelists in a moment. Before we start off on that though, I think we should start doing a round of quick introductions. I'm going to go clockwise. I don't know if everybody else has this in the same order, but Samantha, that is your chance to go first. Give us a quick intro about yourself, please.
Thank you. Hi, so I'm Samantha Webb. My pronouns are she and her. So I'm a freelance writer and a video game producer. I'm currently working with the team behind Adopt Me, and previously I've worked for AAAs and indies. I've worked for Riot Games, I've worked for Ubisoft, and I've also worked on some indie titles. So I've worked on Assassin's Creed Valhalla as a scriptwriter. I've worked on the post-apocalyptic RPG Broken Roads, and I've worked on a small kind of micro studio game called Yokai Moon, which is hopefully going to be released later this year. And I also have an MA in game design from Brunel University. And that's me in a nutshell.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm going to go to my next one round, which is Kim. Hi, Kim. How are you doing? Tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Kim Belair. I'm a writer, I'm a narrative designer, and I'm the CEO of Sweet Baby Inc., which is a narrative development company. In the past, I've worked on Assassin's Creed Syndicate, For Honor, NeoCab, Dota Underlords, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where I've recently learned that I worked with Sam, Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance, and the upcoming Goodbye Volcano High. As a company, Sweet Baby, works in script writing, narrative design, talent development within the industry, and yeah, all kinds of different storytelling.
Awesome, thank you very much. Cool. If I keep on moving around, I get to Frankie. Hello, Frankie. How are you doing?
Hi, yeah, good, thank you.
Tell us about yourself. Sorry.
No worries. My name is Frankie Wakefield-Harry. I'm a narrative designer at Fusebox Games. I started Fusebox as an intern while I was studying English and creative writing at London South Bank University. And there was only 5 people in the company then, and it's since grown to like 40 people. And that was 3 years ago, and now I work there full time. And during that time, I've been working on a interactive fiction games based on TV shows like Love Island or The X Factor. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Before I even jump in further, I would just say that Clara in the Q&A is saying that they absolutely love Ireland and they would like to work on it and things like that. So you've already got fans online here, so the audience is on your side, Frankie. Okay, let's keep on going around with the intros. Giles, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name's Giles Armstrong, pronouns are he and him, and I am a writer, sometimes narrative designer, often editor for video games. I've been working in the industry since 2007. I've got credits on about 50 commercial games now, so it's been a busy few years. Currently, I'm the lead writer on a game called Destruction All-Stars, which got its reveal during the PS5 event. I was previously a senior writer at Guerrilla Games, so I can now say I worked on Horizon Forbidden West. That's a tongue twister for me, that one. I love it. And I've worked on loads of indie games as well. So some titles include The Spectrum Retreat, Bomber Crew. My brain's going blank, but
Not heard of that one.
Lots of games.
Cool, thank you, Giles. So a little bit about myself. My name is Matta Haggis-Burridge. I go by he and they pronouns. I don't mind which you fancy using. I am a professor over in the Netherlands. I research games and teach about games design at Brady University of Applied Sciences, which is Princeton rated one of the top 20 games dev courses in the world. I'm also a freelance writer for AAA and indie games, most recently on Resident Evil Resistance. I've been working with the team, some of the people over at Dying Light, on Dying Light 2, should I say, over at Techland. And other things I can't tell you about because I have NDA signed for absolutely everything, which I think is pretty much normal in the industry. So that's all of us. As you can tell, we've got a good mix tonight of people who've done AAA, indie, a bit of both, or a bit of, well, actually, I think everybody's done some indie here, haven't we? Yeah, everybody's nodding their heads. Cool. I think really let's just start off with kind of where we should begin with this, of like, how do you get in? How does, one of the questions we have is, how does somebody with zero experience start out gaining experience, beginning connections in the industry, learning skills that are going to get them onto this job? How do people begin to get experience writing for games? By all means, jump in, wave your hand at the screen, unmute yourself. However, who wants to go first? Anybody? Okay, Kim, go for it.
I think in terms of getting into the industry and gaining experience, they're two, unfortunately, very different things. I think gaining experience is as easy as building a portfolio, kind of. I often advise young writers to kind of like try to, if they're doing design and narrative design, kind of, you know, reverse engineer a scene in a thing that they love, kind of look at that and think about all the choices that went into it. Practice script writing, practice bark writing, practice copywriting. For me, I did copywriting for a very long time when I was much younger, and getting into that was very easy for me to kind of get the reflex of being edited very coldly, of being told, like, you know, Tostitos requests 25 different taglines for their new jalapeno lime flavor, and all the 25 ones you wrote first aren't working. So I think getting a lot of those muscles going is how you gain experience and build that portfolio, but actually getting into the industry is a much different matter indeed. And I think it depends very, very heavily on who you are, who your friends are, and what resources you have access to, both as a creator and as just a person in the world, whether that means like your demographic or your income. There are so many different ways to get into this industry, and what getting into this industry means, that it's I think what I'm excited about in this panel is to kind of talk about all the different ways that people can get in, rather than the feeling sometimes that people have, which is it's this monolith that once you get in, you can just do whatever you want, but the walls are so high.
Yeah, so how did you get started?
I got started actually in community. I used to do brand voice for companies. I have my degrees in marketing.
Okay.
And I did a lot of writing on the side. I was always doing creative writing. I worked on a bunch of projects, just like as a writer, as an author, as doing a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But my job was in marketing. And then on LinkedIn, actually, I was asked if I wanted to try joining the community development team over at Ubisoft Montreal. And community development is, we would kind of create often narrative world building content. And getting through that, eventually, I actually did one project for Far Cry 4 that ended up getting into the game. And then I was asked, like, would you be interested in kind of going along that path? But that was how I turned into a full-time writer rather than just writing for games. Because I think that's what a lot of people don't necessarily think about. It's that, like, getting involved in games, creating narrative content in whatever area you have, and eventually kind of like moving into that slowly and learning that way. So I think, yeah, my path in was through marketing, a marketing degree, brand voice, and LinkedIn. So
I think probably fairly unusual to go in that way. Yeah, Samantha.
So first of all, like Kim's advice there, I think is absolutely spot on. That's really, really excellent advice. I think just one thing I'd like to add is that I think because of all of the, exactly what Kim was talking through there, I think it can be really overwhelming at the start just to get started, right? Because it's like you read all these blogs and you listen to people talking and you hear people's experience and you think, oh, you know, there's just so much to do. What's the first step and how do I start? And I think, like, honestly, just writing. Like, if you want to be a writer, we're assuming that you love writing. And so do that, you know, do writing and do whatever kind of writing is accessible to you at that point in time. So if that's writing short stories, that's great. You know, that's a really good starting point. If it's writing articles for game magazines, that's also great. Like, use that as a starting point. And don't, like, you know, don't get caught up on that, on having a list of 100 different things you've got to do, and just start with writing and build from there. Like, I have generally spoken to a lot of people who will come to me and say, well, I really want to be a games writer. And I'm like, okay, what are you writing at the moment? And the reply is often, oh, I'm not. Which isn't ideal. And I think the other side of that is also, like Kim said again, to play games. Again, you know, I've spoken to a lot of people who are maybe writers with different writing backgrounds who want to become game writers. But when I ask them, you know, what's the last great narrative game that you played, they'll say, well, I don't really play games. And it's like, well, then, you know, how can you expect to understand the medium you're writing for if you're not engaging with that already? And I think as an aspiring game writer, then being told to go and write and go and play games should be a really exciting thing for you to do. And it really is the first step. So if you're already doing that, great, do more of it, do it consciously. So, you know, when you are playing games, make sure you're looking at the narrative, thinking, well, is this good? Am I enjoying this? Is this engaging? If so, how? If not, why? You know, if I heard an NPC say something that kind of brought me out a bit, what was it about it? Was it the phrasing? Was it the, you know, whatever it is? And that's how you'll start building those muscles.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Kim mentioned the term BARCs. And so, yeah, for people who are new to the industry, might not be familiar with that one. BARCs are basically kind of randomly, not exactly randomly, but generically triggered items. We often have, it's a very common joke among writers, like having to write 20 ways of shouting grenade. That's kind of your introduction to a lot of people for the narrative. It's like grenade, spiky pineapple, danger bomb. And so BARCs are essentially things that we write lots and lots of variations of, because we know that the enemy is going to shout 20 times, he's over there, I think he saw him in that way, there he is, here he comes. And, you know, sometimes when we hear one of those that's wrong, picking apart why it might have been triggered, why it might sound wrong, can actually be kind of the writer's job, and in the team, that's often what we do. Before I move to Frankie on the same sort of question, I think, Samantha, how did you start off in the industry? What got you in the door with the games company first time?
So yeah, it's an interesting story. So my background was actually in business consultancy. So I worked for IBM for 7 years, which is incredibly uncreative, as you can probably imagine. Great in other ways, but a very different industry. And I kind of always knew that I wanted to work in video games. And then I was doing a lot of agile coaching and project management. So I had a tangible skill that I knew I could kind of sidestep into. And, you know, a lot of mine was just kind of the stars aligning at the right time. You know, I had skills that were needed, but I was also kind of reaching out to companies I knew I wanted to work for that I knew were based in London. And I actually managed to get a dev manager role with Riot Games when they opened their new UK office. And that was kind of how I stepped into it. And at the same time as I was doing that, I was also doing an MA part-time. So I was working for IBM, but then doing my game design MA. And that helped me kind of build up some connections and stuff like that. And then to actually get into the writing, you know, once I got into the industry, this was basically a 5-year plan. Like there was no kind of overnight magic happening. It was all very, I put a lot of work into it, a lot of thinking into how to do this. So when I got into the industry then, I worked really hard on meeting people and, you know, chatting to people that I liked in the industry that I'd gone with, and then making games with them and, you know, talking about narrative with them and playing games with them and all of that kind of stuff. And I actually, so Ubisoft was my first game writer role, and it was purely through networking. So it was through the Writers Guild. It was meeting people who were working on that and talking to them, and then obviously having a portfolio and having I had to take a writing test to obviously show that I could write. So again, that's where all that previous work then kicks in. So even if you haven't written for games before, if you've got strong writing skills, you know, you're going to be able to demonstrate that. Yeah, and that's how I started freelancing as a writer, and that was it really.
Cool, thank you. Frankie, how did you start up in games?
So I was halfway through my university degree, and I remember I applied for a job as a librarian and then I didn't get it, and I was like, oh, that's annoying. What else could I do? And then I was thinking, oh, I really want to buy a PlayStation, but I really can't just justify buying a PlayStation, spending all that money on it without some kind of yeah. So I was like, oh, it could be research. I could look into games, and I was like, actually, not games. This should be something I should do. And then again, like what Samantha said about the stars aligning. I had a lecture, and my lecturer said that there was a company next door to where we were at university who were looking for an internship, and she'd offered it to the third years, but nobody had gone for it. So would we second years like to go for it? And I was like, yes. And it was writing for the X Factor game. That was the original IP that we had, and yeah, so I went to the interview and was really enthusiastic about how much I loved games. Was really open that I had never written for games before, apart from episode interactive games, and that I would, you know, be starting off on a very kind of like, you know, knowledge was what I lacked, but enthusiasm was what I had. So yeah, that's kind of where that came from. I showed them some episode interactive games that I'd made, and kind of just kept sort of emailing, kept in contact with them, and eventually, yeah, we started brainstorming for the games, and I started part-time with them while I was through my uni degree, and then when I graduated, I became full-time. So that was my path.
Nice. So I think one of the things that's interesting here is that we've got some very different stories emerging. Some are very much like hard work. Some's almost in the right place at the right time, and we're going to talk more about kind of getting into this industry, particularly if you're not in a situation where luck is going to be on your side. So we're going to get to that later on. But first, before we go to that, Giles, tell us how you started. 2007, I think you said. Oh, you are muted. Your microphone is not coming through. 1 second. He's rebooting his microphone. Have another go. You're still muted? Oh, I heard something. There you go. You're back.
So that's me. I was just saying, do it while you can, because it's one of the few times he's quiet.
Is it any better?
There we go. Perfect. Can hear you now.
Sorry about that, everyone. I had to swap headsets and obviously messed it all up. So yeah, 2007. So I started off, I guess what you could call my route into the industry, kind of, it used to be the traditional route. I started off as a QA tester for Electronic Arts, and that was in Madrid, long time ago. And I was a peak tester. So rather than the QA testers that we have now who, you know, spend a lot of time on the same game for a very, very long time, I was in this really lucky position where I had this summer job, and pretty much every couple of weeks it was a different game. And we were testing online and network stuff. So the team always joked all we ever did was just unplug Ethernet cables, but there was more to it than that, you know.
Plugged them in as well.
Exactly. Yeah, no, so I started off, that was only a short role. And when I then had to look for another job, it was just a case of applying for a job, just like an entry-level role. So I was looking absolutely everywhere, and the place that would give me a chance was Relentless Software down in Brighton, who used to make the Buzz series of quiz games for PlayStation formats. And basically, yeah, no, I was a media editor for them. So at one point, if you saw a video clip or a photo, it would have come through these hands. And I always, like, I've always been interested in games, pretty much from birth. Like my mum, she had a Commodore 64, and some of my earliest memories are her absolutely kicking Pac-Man's butt. And yeah, so games have always been a part of my life. And when I went to university, I actually did film and video because I wanted to be a film writer. My whole aspiration was to save the British film industry, because I was sick of all the rom-coms that you know, they just weren't my cup of tea. And
they made a massive amount of money. How dare they?
You know, that's kind of the naivety of youth, right? But yeah, no. So I finished uni. I could not get a job making tea on the set anywhere or in any production offices, and I loved games, and my dissertation was all about games, and it kind of reinvigorated that within me. So it was just a case of applying for jobs. At Relentless Software, they were making a narrative game at the time called Blue Toad Murder Files. So I managed to blag my way as a junior designer, like doing narrative design with them. And yeah, I just basically just kept on applying for jobs. And it's been a very, very long path to go from QA tester to working on, you know, some very big games now.
Yeah, I think something we're going to come back to is kind of how to stay in the industry as well. I think that's something that's an important one, but it's interesting to hear kind of the differences. And I think perhaps with the exception of Frankie there, we've all come from a different area. So for me, my start in it, I'd been making animations and games online using Flash for about 7 years. Before, this was 2000 to 2007, so this was before the term indie developer existed, but essentially that's what it was. Then I went to the kind of AAA, and they were like, what have you made? I went, well, I made all of these. They went, yeah, but what proper games have you made? It's like, oh yeah, I've had 15 million people play my last game. How many have played your last game? I didn't say that bit in the interview. Don't say that in interviews. But for me, the step into the narrative side of it was like, I'd been writing for years. I was passionate about it. And I worked in level design, because level design was an area where I could get a little bit of ownership, like Kim was saying, with community stuff, getting a little bit of ownership of the storytelling, and then kind of showing I'm competent, I can be trusted, and then kind of building trust up until you can kind of step into a stronger narrative role. So I think a lot of people, seems, we all work our way in from different edges. We've had a few questions actually sort of about working our way in. I think this is one of the trickier ones that we've touched on. Oh, apparently Giles is audible to us, but he isn't to the attendees. Attendees, if you, that was coming through just fine, still couldn't hear Giles. That is very strange.
Do you want me to drop out and come back in again?
Yep, let's try logging Giles out and logging back in again. That sometimes works. Yeah. Sorry, folks, about that. We didn't see that one. Andy has just poked me. I think one of the other topics, I've had a few people, oh, and somebody else can hear him just fine. This is very strange. Some people are hearing him, some people aren't. Gotta love technology. Sticking with the questions that we had beforehand, we've had a couple of questions about getting in when, and specifically, here's one of the phrasings: how do you break in if you're poor, when you can't afford to pay or play to play or get that laptop to make games? And I think this is going to be difficult. Who's got any thoughts they'd like to share about this, or just wave at the camera or just jump in? Kim, yeah?
I think that it's twofold. I think that obviously the way that the industry has framed games is usually with a center on AAA, on things that are very, very heavy, that are very, very big. And I think if you don't have the resources available to you to necessarily play those, whether it's console, whether to experience them, whether you don't have the time because you have other responsibilities. And I think for that case for a lot of people. And for that reason, I think the onus is also on us as people in the industry to champion smaller games, to understand the brilliance of smaller games, of easier to access games, of things that are made in Twine or ink, free things that people can kind of get into, to start kind of opening up, you know, phone games, and to stop having that derision that we often have when we speak about mobile games. You know, start being more inclusive in that way, and as far as what a game means and how easy it is to join. But also, I think the onus is also on us to reach into different communities in order to do that. And I say the same of anyone who's in a marginalized group. There's this idea, I think, a lot of the time that, you know, with hard work and a good portfolio, you can do anything you want. But ultimately, it has nothing to do, it's not a meritocracy. This industry is not in any way a meritocracy. It is very much driven by who you know. It is driven by the kinds of people that we tend to trust, the kinds of people that we allow to come in as juniors, you know, and the kind of person who feels inspired when they see an ad that asks for more experience to apply anyway. You know, that all across the board, there are so many inequalities that I think we as an industry have to take responsibility for it and start reaching out to more communities, start doing that work ourselves rather than having any expectation that, you know, they're going to work hard to eventually be seen by us. And
yeah,
I think that, you know, the resources available, if you don't have, if you are poor, are, you know, you can use Twine, you can use a lot of tabletop stuff to get the practice of design and writing. But I think that we need to seek it out and to say that what we're looking for is outside of the industry that we currently know.
Yeah, definitely. I think accessibility and things like Twine are a classic example here, that you can run that on the lowest power laptop that, well, almost any laptop, I think, would be able to run Twine. Also, I think great mention of things like tabletop things. Like a lot of people started off in storytelling and games, started off with things like Dungeons and Dragons and, you know, fantasy role playing and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think we don't invite a lot of marginalized people into that. Like, even as it becomes more popular as D&D, it's a very much like celebrity and influencer owned in terms of visibility. And I think the perception of it has long been, you know, white men play Dungeons and Dragons. That has changed, of course. That has never been 100% true, of course, but it's also changed a great deal over the years. And I think it's gotten to a place where we can have kids telling stories, we can have young people telling stories no matter what, and kind of frame it in a way that invites them in to learn these mechanics, to look forward to telling stories, to get practice there that is valuable, and see it not only as time wasting and play, but as education and professional. I think things like that, you know, help make it more accessible. And then our job will be to say who is organizing these, or to organize these things ourselves. Like one thing that I have been talking to a couple places about lately is you can reach out to, you know, home, like halfway houses, places that are community centers for different communities and different demographics, and say, hi, I have 3 hours a week to play a Zoom session with the people who are here, to do a Zoom session of D&D every week or so. And if you can volunteer that, if you can find people to do it, immediately you're creating something that you're doing as a volunteer, but has value to a community who now is going to experience this. So it's all these little ways, and like it's kind of that balance of the work that they have to be interested in and the work that we can do to facilitate it.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's been a few people who've been asking about how to get in when you're a non-native English speaker, when you've come from different backgrounds, these kind of things. Giles, you've unmuted yourself. Oh, by the way, there's one thing I wanted to mention. Chat is off at the moment, but you can ask questions via Q&A. We will do our best to get through them. I think one of the questions on there was can you, is writing text adventures a good idea? And as we just discussed there, I think, yeah, Twine, Inkle and things like this are great ways of getting in. Text adventures are absolutely valid ways to get experience of thinking about branching and choices. Unfortunately, Giles is just having to restart his PC by the sound of things. Apparently some people can't hear Kim, not sure what Zoom is doing. I apologise to everybody if voices are dropping in and out. I hope we can do this. Maybe if we just all leave our microphones on, hopefully things will consistently, maybe the muting and unmuting is confusing it. So Frankie, Samantha, if you want to pop in there. Any thoughts on how to get in as a non-native English speaker? Because I've had a few questions about this, both in the chat and prior to this. Yeah.
I also don't want to bogart the mic, so if anyone else does, but actually working on level design and narrative design, because story itself is universal, and not every job in narrative, I think, is something I want to stress, is about writing. It's more about storytelling, and working actually on Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I was paired with this incredible level designer named David Boll, and he's from France. He speaks English very, very well, but it's, you know, he's not comfortable writing dialogue in that language. But when we worked together, sometimes he would stub a script and say, like, this is what I'm picturing as a level, this is the kind of scene I want to have. And then for myself, I can come in and write that and get the wording and get the voice correct. But it was absolutely a 50-50 partnership on the things that we worked on together. And so I often encourage people, like, if they're not necessarily comfortable in the language, like, look at narrative design, look at level design, because you could absolutely, while you are getting more comfortable in language, if you so choose, you can still facilitate storytelling. You know, every part of, if you're writing a story-driven game, all the mechanics are helping to tell that story. You know, working on this project, like, so many people are French first, but you see, oh, you can tell the story. You are telling, in animations, you are telling how this character moves, how this character feels. So I think it's all part and parcel of it.
Yeah, so actually one of the things is teaming up with people with other skills, sharing what your strengths are and learning from each other.
Yeah, getting into storytelling that isn't necessarily pure writing.
Yeah. Frankie, I suppose on Love Island, you've worked with a lot of things like localization. How's that? Well, have you worked with localization teams?
In my knowledge that we have over and across Germany, and it's been a case of kind of like sourcing out the people to translate the game and make sure that the jokes kind of fit into in when you're reading it in German. And yeah, that's a brilliant skill in itself. That's an incredible thing to be able to do. And yeah, I would say never feel like you shouldn't apply for something on the basis of your confidence with the language. I probably will mention this like a couple of times, but Fusebox Games are hoping to bring together a mentorship program, which is hoping to bring give people experience who might not normally think that they have like a way into the industry. It's kind of myself and 4 other colleagues, 3 of them who will be on these talks, 2 other people who will be on these talks in the next couple of days, and we're putting together a mentorship scheme, and we're hoping to send out a survey to kind of find out what people want from a mentorship scheme, and how that can like benefit them in their career, and how we can give them the credits, and what sort of resources and funding they'd need, like what, for example, if they can't afford like a laptop that's powerful enough to have thousands of tabs open, because that's the other part of writing. It's the tabs. So yeah, that's something that we're hoping to bring forth, and Andy is going to be sharing a email with the survey in to people that are interested.
Cool. So obviously something that a few people have asked about is obviously alongside working on trying to kind of get experience with the writing, quite a few people who've got experience with the writing, they've been doing that groundwork and developing their own perhaps authorial voice. How would you suggest, I mean, how many of you actually have design skills? Because obviously we've come from different backgrounds here. We've got IBM to community management. Giles has just done this, but let's just test your mic to see if that works. Giles, does your mic work? Okay, I can hear you. Can other people hear Giles? Just pop up in the QA if you can hear Giles.
I'm going to keep on talking. Testing. Is the Q&A people happy?
I'm seeing yes coming up here. Thank you, everybody in the Q&A. But yeah, so I mean, Samantha, is it Samantha or Sam? Which do you prefer?
Samantha.
Samantha. Have you worked on kind of design side of it? Do you do any programming? Do you do any visual scripting? What did you know when you started and what do you know now? Is there a difference in kind of technical skill level, or have you just stuck purely with words?
Yeah, so around technical skill, I've never learned to code or anything like that. I've worked with, in my past life, as a business consultant, I've worked with a lot of devs. So I've always kind of, done really beginner coding courses just to get a feel for computer logic and stuff. But I've never, I've never done anything more complicated than basically pulling boxes around and linking them up. Like, that's the extent of my technical knowledge, which as a writer you can definitely get away with. Like, in a lot of places will use things like Artisy Draft or an industry equivalent, which is literally, you type text into a box, you link it up. If you've got branching, you can link it to other boxes, and it's all very visual to look at, and quite straightforward to use. I've kind of, I've worked in Unity, but very much to go in and replace placeholder text. I've never done any actual coding or logic stuff there. I think definitely for me, the importance is to be familiar. Like, don't be scared of tech. Don't be scared of the look of code, because you might well have to go in it. You might have to go into a really complicated Excel spreadsheet and change things. Certainly my experience as a writer is I'm often just trusted to change the writing. I'm not asked to do anything more complicated, but it still requires that level of familiarity to be able to go into Unity and not be scared, or to look at a billion tabs in Excel and not get overwhelmed by it. But then I suspect maybe some other people have some different experiences there. I suspect it depends what kind of game you're on, what studio you're in.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned a few different tools there. I mean, you mentioned Artisy Draft. For people who are completely new to the industry, Artisy Draft is a quite high level, quite sophisticated way of building branching narratives and connections. It's even got kind of logic systems for tracking how many items you've got in the inventory and things like that. It's really quite an advanced system there. If you look at something like Twine, it's a lot more visual, of like, pull this thing connects to this thing, and you actually end up with kind of a ball string almost on your screen as it all links up together. Inkle is a lot more code-like in its language, a bit more like an HTML markup. So it's somewhere, it's not quite code, but it encourages code-like thinking. But you also mentioned Excel. Now I'm going to jump to Giles here. Excel. Do you love Excel, or do you hate Excel, or do you just use Excel constantly like me?
Yeah, well, you use the right tool for the job. I mean, my primary tools really are just word processors and spreadsheets. It's just about getting the words down however you want. Like something like Artisy Draft, I've used before, and it's great if you're doing like a branching narrative system. It's fantastic. As you mentioned, Twine, that's great because also Twine is free. So I missed some of the answers earlier. Sorry about all the tech issues, but in terms of an easy or a more accessible tool, because it's free, if you can open a web browser, then you can use Twine. I think Inkle, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you can use that for free, maybe?
Yes.
But yeah, no, so I mean, my current project is all about spreadsheets. It's all about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bucks. So, I mean, I used word processor for character bios, for like kind of cinematic type scripts, which usually I use a screenplay type format. When I was learning, again, you can easily access screenplays online, so you can get a sense of a format that works for most people. And Kim had a fantastic example earlier when she said, if you're not sure kind of how to use these documents and these tools, you can look at your favorite games and you can kind of reverse engineer. You know, you could take a scene from Spider-Man. I picked Spider-Man because I love it. You could take a cinematic from that and you could say, right, how have the writers put this down on the page? And then if you want to, you can even get the script book at the moment, so you can actually see how right you were. You can, you know, check your transcripts. But yeah, no, spreadsheets, I used to be a bit funny and say, keep my words out of cells. They want to roam free. But the problem is spreadsheets are really handy and they're really useful, especially when you're managing thousands upon thousands of lines that then have to interact with code over there, and you know the artists need this information. So I'm just grateful and lucky that I leave the clever people to the clever things, and I just get to make up stories for a living and, you know, do quips and barks and banter. Yeah, I've never had to touch a line of code in my life, so please don't let anyone ever tell you you have to know how to code. It's definitely handy to have at least a basic understanding of every department, but you certainly don't need to be like a genius hacker to be a writer. I'm not by any means.
Yeah, and I think we'd all agree that you don't have to be a hardcore programmer at all. But I think the moment you realise that you just gave a player a choice, and now there's either two versions of your story forever afterwards, or you're going to have to tie them back together somehow and still honour that player's choice.
Yeah.
The first time you do that, your head just goes, oh no, that's what games writing is all about.
But you see, that's why it's also really handy that if you sort of get into grips with something like that, even if you don't kind of write out the whole structure, just getting a notepad and playing through a game that you like and just making a note, right, where does this fork? Where does the choice diverge? Where do they bring it back? And you'll find that with, for instance, like the amazing classic Telltale games, that there's lots and lots and lots of flavor choices, but the actual kind of like big, impactful, this changes everything choices are very minimal, for good reasons, because you don't want to create art and animation and assets for every conceivable choice, because the game would be too expensive to make, among other reasons.
Yeah, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in what we do, I think. I think we've all seen that kind of side of it, which obviously brings us somewhat along to an interesting topic, which is portfolio material. When people want to get started, they want to build a portfolio. When people want to stay in the industry, move to a different job. Giles, you are freelance, that's right, I think?
Yes.
Yeah, if you're freelance. Frankie, you're embedded over at Fusebox. Samantha, are you with the studio permanently on contract, or?
I tend to freelance.
Okay, you freelance as well. And Kim, you're with a studio, aren't you? I know you've got your own company, yes.
Yeah, I'm with my own place. So technically both. We're a relatively small company, but we work on contracts with clients. Yeah.
So, we've got some different experiences. I freelance at the moment. I have worked embedded as well. So portfolios. When you're looking to get a new client, and they say, prove to me you're good, what do you folks show them? Most of my stuff is NDA. Kim, I saw you on mute for a second there. What do you show people?
I think as a basis for a portfolio, now that I have enough past work and now that we have enough client work, a lot of the time it's just acknowledge like you've made these things, but when I need to kind of collate that, I try to take some script, like some cinematic or interaction, like a fully rendered conversation. Because I think that a lot of people start out doing that anyway. People want to get right to that script. It's this idea of being able to tell that story. And I think people see that, despite the fact that it's not, cinematics are by no means the most important thing to write for games, but people still have that feeling. So a lot of the time they start with script. Barks, I think, are something I advise people to put into their portfolios, put 25 to 50 of those, just to say, this is the level of comfort I have with it. Yeah. I try to do a little bit, if you have the narrative design brain, it's always nice to include something branching, whether that's just a tree that's annotated with your explanations or a twine game, and a little bit of character background, but character background as expressed through mechanics. So it's not really useful to say, oh, this is the character's backstory that we never see expressed, but coming up with a move set for a character in a fighting game even, and explaining what those things are is going to be like, that's how it's actually expressed. It's not just going to be stuff that you can dream up. It's the actual deliverables that are going to affect the design of the game. So why does a character have this move set? What spells do they use that speak to who they are? So things like that that really give a sense of like the mechanics and the crunchiness of that. And everything, I want it to all be player facing when I see a portfolio. I think there's a tendency a lot of the time when we think about writing, and even within writers' rooms, we kind of go like, we really know what we're doing and we're telling this incredibly deep story, but none of it matters unless it's player facing. If the player can't understand what I'm trying to tell them, it doesn't matter how many pages of world building I have. It's not working. So I try to advise people doing portfolios to say, like, what as a player do you experience and how is that being expressed to you?
Yeah. Giles, you just unmuted over there?
Yeah, so I agree with some of that, but some of it I don't agree with, in terms of when you're putting together writing samples, it's like player-facing material is important, but the purpose of your writing sample is to get you a job. So it's less about player-facing necessarily. It's more about, can you hand this writing sample to someone else on the dev team and they can work from it, they can do something with it. So when I put together writing samples, typically what I'll do is I'll look at the studio that I'm applying to, or that I'm, you know, trying to impress in some way, and like, it really helps to be aware of as much games press, games media as you can. So if there are clues as to what game they're making, just from reports and rumors, then I'll look at that game and I'll think, right, how are they going to tell the story in that game? What are the main methods of storytelling? And if I'm not too sure, I'll look at their previous release. So, you know, when I applied at Gorilla, I had a feeling that after their previous game was very successful, maybe they'll be making another. That was just a gut feeling, you know, because if you look at trends, you look at patterns, that tends to be how things go. So I thought, right, the samples I'm going to pick something that feels like it could be part of that world. So it wasn't part of that world. It didn't try to replicate anything that they do within their previous games. But I thought, right, what are the main methods of storytelling? So I sent in cinematics, but I also thought, what kind of work are they going to have me do? So I sent in character bios, I sent in barks. I didn't send in anything branching because I was thinking primarily about the tasks that I'm likely to do in this role, and then focused on proving that I could do those really well. And apparently that worked.
Good job. Nice. Frankie, you've unmuted over there.
Yeah, I was just thinking, yeah, the pieces that I brought to the Fusebox, kind of going off on what you'd said there, and kind of, yeah, going off on instincts is a really good idea on what the company are looking for. So I knew that they were looking for something that was about the X Factor, and also Baywatch was also mentioned. So I was like, okay, I'll create a game that's about some people shipwrecked onto an island, and yeah, I included branching dialogue into it. So in the end, you either got off the island or you burnt the island and died in flames. So that was one of the pieces I brought to them. The other one was that you played as an old couple auditioning for the X Factor, and it was just a bunch of fun, really. So yeah, kind of it was really specific because I was lucky enough to know exactly what they were looking for, and I catered the portfolio to be that specific. And I think that does definitely help, because that's what they're looking for.
Samantha, how much research do you do on, obviously Giles is saying there, kind of research who you're going to be working for, who you're going to be writing for. How much research do you do when you're looking for new jobs, new gigs in companies?
Lots, basically. Yeah, absolutely. And I think everyone here has raised a really good point around when you are looking for jobs, and especially when it comes to that portfolio piece. And that's that my advice is, first of all, it's never going to end. You're never going to get to that point where it's like, my portfolio is perfect, I'm never going to have to touch this again, because we're constantly evolving as writers, and you know, we're constantly getting better at our craft and learning new things, and you want to reflect that in your portfolio. And secondly, you know, the same as with a cover letter, with a CV, with all this other stuff, your portfolio shouldn't be the same for everything you're applying to. I think unless you're extremely lucky, you know, that's just not going to work, because people are going to look at it, and like Giles said, if you're applying for a game that doesn't have branching, it doesn't have that branching side to it, then what are they going to do with those samples? Or, you know, if you're just putting in something that either doesn't suit the tone, perhaps, or you know, what the players are going to be playing and what you're going to be working on, then you've done yourself a disservice, basically. You know, all the time that you put into that is effectively going to be wasted, because other people will have done their research and will be kind of looking into that. So I do the same. You know, it's I'll be looking at what games they brought out recently, the same with so when I had my Ubisoft interview, I didn't know it was for Assassin's Creed. I knew it was on something unannounced. And, you know, I did the same thing. I kind of researched it. I hedged my bets. I looked at the writing test I was given. I was like, I'm going to go with an Assassin's Creed feel for this, because that's my gut instinct, is that it's, if not that game, then it's that kind of game. And so then when I did, you know, my writing test for them, it was with that in mind. So it was a very specific kind of tone. But yeah, I think it is really important, because you can be the best writer in the world, but if you haven't put the effort in to at least attempt to match tone, or to give them something that they can see that means you'll be a good fit and you'll be able to write with them, then, like I said, you know, you're putting in hard work in the wrong places, I suppose.
The thing about the research is that obviously the ideal is to play the game, if you can play the previous releases by that studio, but you don't necessarily have to. So for instance, it's equally valid to go on YouTube, look up gameplay clips, look at how they deliver their story, but also maybe even watching a movie of the entire game, which isn't ideal, but playing recent games is an expensive thing. So there are ways of researching without having to pay top dollar as well.
Yeah, I really do encourage people to do that. Sorry, Kim?
I think that's a really good point as far as the accessibility is concerned, is like, I'm really grateful for that. Because even for myself, if I just don't have time to play something, but I'm like, oh, I want to see how this works. I think it's really, really helpful to get tone. And I also think that there's a difference, as we talk about portfolios, your portfolio not only changes with time just because it's natural, but because, you know, when you're first starting out, I think versatility, depending on where you're, is going to be like, okay, I'm going to really be versatile in what I can do. I'm going to show a broad range of my experience. I might show this, I might show barks, I might show that, I might show that. And then as I become, you know, higher up in my career, further along at least, I don't know, you know, it's not this, it's kind of like that. But I think you get a sense of, okay, now I know what I also want to do. And I think that's another thing. It's not just what they want to see, but it's like, what can you bring, and what do you really feel like, this is what I'm really interested in, so I'm going to really show a killer version of that. I'm also going to include, you know, barks and stuff that are more like facts, just so I can show you like, oh, I'm also going to be doing that, and I'm also competent, but really lean into the things that you're like, oh, I'm excited to bring this to the team, and I think I'm really going to show them where I fit.
Yeah, I very much know what you mean. I've worked in a lot of different things, a lot of different genres, and I got best known a few years ago for writing a game called Fragments of Him, which is very much like an indie drama. It's about a bisexual man who dies in an accident, and his friends and family come to terms with that loss. So there's a lot about queer identity, there's a lot about clashing political ideologies and gaining acceptance and letting love conquer all, and these kind of messages. And most of the games I've written recently are zombie post-apocalyptic horrors. And the interesting, yeah, loads of crossover. But the funny thing is, there kind of is, because as long as you honour kind of the premise, which is, you know, horror, action, this kind of stuff, your voice as a writer tends to seep through and come through there. And I know, I think something interesting is obviously we've got Kim and Samantha saying they've actually worked on the same project, but they didn't actually ever talk to each other. And a lot of the time, if you're working on these really big projects, there is this huge range of voices working on that, and lots of people with their own things in it. And actually, that's some of the great value that you get with these huge projects, is that you get all kinds of stories from all kinds of perspectives. Which kind of goes back to our thing before, which we'd really hope that big studios do hire people with different backgrounds and different perspectives. We've had some questions in the comments here of how do you write for characters that are not from your own background? I think somebody gave the example of a cis woman writing for a black trans man, or something like that. And it's like, any advice for people who are stepping outside of their own kind of cultural background? My advice personally is get other people to work with who have that background. If you really, really can't, and you're like a team of one and given that responsibility, read the hell out of this, talk to everybody, do the hell out of your research, but preferably work with them. Anybody else have experience of doing this? Kim, go for it.
Yeah, I think for me, the advice that I give at this point is make sure you hire people who can help you with that. You know, expand your team, whether that's in consultants but ideally as writers. I think that there's a huge issue that, especially a couple of years ago, I remember we saw at E3 where there were so many women as leads in games or like as major characters in games, so many people of color, and then you look at the writing teams and they're just like mostly white, primarily male. But yeah, across the board, you're like, okay, so when you're doing these things, you're not telling an authentic story. You're not telling a story that is truly representative of the experience. And the difference between having someone on the team who says, oh no, this would not happen this way, or this is how it is huge. And that's part of the work that I do through my company and as a person, is try to make sure that we're building teams that are diverse. I don't want to always be, no matter how successful I become, I don't want to own the story of somebody else when they deserve a place in this industry, when they deserve a voice. And I did like a GDC talk in 2019, I think it was, and it was called Representation as Innovation, because I think that the way we need to start thinking about it is as innovation. Getting new stories told, getting new voices in is innovating the same way that getting new tech is innovating. When we start saying like, oh, it's imperative that we do this because it's going to make our game better, we have to say the same thing about story. We have to say that this is going to make our game better. It's not going to make it more sensitive. It's not going to just make it like, it's going to actually improve it overall. And that, I think, is how to take it. So it's not to say that, we can never tell stories of people who aren't ourselves. It's just that first and foremost, credit belongs to people with lived experience. Money should be going to the people with lived experience.
Hell yeah.
And beyond research, you're just never going to have it, and especially when you get to a certain point in your career, when you have the ability and you have the leadership and you have the money and you can say, I'm going to take a pay cut so that this other person can join in, it means the world. It means even if you say, okay, you have 3 months on this project that I've been working on for 2 years, you still get a credit, you still get paid, and then that person can now move on to another project with that credit and, and flourish. And that, I think, is where our responsibility is to representing people. It's not about sensitivity, because the way that I often explain it, and I'll wrap up really fast, is that the way that I always explain it is that when you get just consultants, when you get research, a lot of the time, all you end up with is you say like, okay, I've made something that might be, say, racist. And now I have consultants in to tell me how to make it less racist. But by the time you're getting there, you have the opportunity to not just fix, what is perceived as a flaw, not just sand down the rough edges, but actually innovate, actually bring joy to the marginalized people you're talking about. And that, to me, is where we're not doing enough. We're not asking people, we're saying like, what do you not want to see? What would hurt you? How has this hurt you? Can I stop hurting you? But we aren't asking, how can I make you smile? How can I make you laugh? How can I give you that feeling of representation where you see yourself in a game and feel like it's real?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is where, we should all be working in these issues. And so when people ask like, how do you do it? You say, oh, I don't. I work with people from that group, and I do my best to make sure that they have a voice.
Yeah. I think we see, particularly within the indie community and indie sport, the Twine community, for example, there's a great representation of queer community voices, people of colour voices, trans communities really embraced all the Twine games, things like that. We also see some political games coming out on there as well, which are really talking about these barriers. Somebody mentioned Greg Buchanan's game, Paper Brexit, in the questions, and it's some really interesting stuff that can be around in that. We see sort of games like Dysphoria, very indie game, sort of one of the famous ones dealing with trans identity out there as well. One of the questions that we had here was, read it literally as a games writer, is there a potential to be typecast? Do certain games writers become known for being specialists in particular game genres, styles, formats, etc.? Frankie, you've mostly worked with licenses of TV shows at the moment. Do you think this is something that's going to hit you later in your career, or how do you feel about this kind of topic?
Maybe. I think it's a really interesting one, and I feel like you can kind of become typecasted within your own studio on like what sort of projects you get put on, or what sort of like characters you have to write, and yeah, it's almost kind of like, it's almost, I try and look at it as less of like being typecasted. If for example I was to go to another studio and work on another game that was focused on like a TV show, or if I wanted to branch out and write on something that was completely separate, an original idea, it's just kind of like allowing that knowledge that you've kind of gained from this and sort of showing where it can benefit something else, like for example writing on Love Island, which is an entirely if you don't know, the Love Island, the show is based about 16 people going into an island, going into a villa and finding love. And the game follows the same format of the TV show. And yeah, so that's a very kind of niche thing to be writing for, but there's strength in it, that finding the sort of human the human.
That's not niche, that's mainstream. That's more mainstream than anything I've done with zombies.
Yeah. Yes, mainstream TV, very mainstream TV, but quite a niche thing that I did not expect to be on my my CV, but I'm really proud of it, and the kind of the sort of human, the humanity that you learn from writing about people falling in love, and then watching players play those characters and fall in love with those characters alongside. That's something that you can bring onto like any story that has any kind of like love in it. It doesn't even have to be romantic love, platonic love, friendship love, brotherly, sisterly love, and or love for yourself as well. So that's something that's really transferable still. And yeah, I hope love's everywhere. So that's where I'd always say, if you feel like that's what's going to be happening to you, then I'd say just to kind of look at where that's transferable. And I believe that anything that you work on is always transferable in a way.
Giles, you look like you wanted to chip in there.
Yeah, well, I was going to say there's loads and loads of transferable skills from what you're describing, because it's not just the actual writing itself, but also the fact of working on a licensed intellectual property. There's all sorts of extra layers and levels of complication there, because it's not just about writing a great game, it's also about writing a great game that the people who own that thing say, yeah, I like what you're doing, please continue. And that's the kind of skill set where once you are adept at doing that, you can then potentially work with other IPs, but also just with other creatives. In terms of previous typecasting, I mean, my first sort of big main games writing job, well, that game got cancelled, so no one heard about that. And then the follow-up to that got cancelled. So then the first one that actually came out, it was a mobile free-to-play game that no one has ever played, but it's called Here Be Monsters. It only exists on fan wikis. I bet people are looking it up now. But it was a free-to-play iPad Facebook game. And so, despite the fact that I had these great writing samples that were kind of like tongue-in-cheek, comedic, fantasy, like poking fun at MMOs, whenever I would speak to recruiters, they'd say, oh, okay, great, well, we haven't got anything that's in free-to-play. And I'd say, yeah, but I can write just about anything. I just need to get that foot in the door. And they're like, oh, yeah, but your CV says free to play. And so, to be honest, the reason that I went freelance was because that game, because no one played it, got cancelled. And so, although it came out, it did have a player base, but it wasn't successful enough to keep going. And so from freelancing, that's when I finally got, because I had to pay the bills, I finally got to actually write the kind of things that really resonated with me. My first freelance work was Velocity 2X by FutureLab, another Brighton studio. And in terms of getting that started, that was a case of having a chat with some people who I recognized who used to work at Relentless Software. I was at EGX, Eurogame Expo back then, just went over and said, hi, this game looks amazing. Have you got a writer? I said, oh, we need a writer. And like that's like it can be as easy or as fortunate, as lucky as that. Yeah, no, it can be very difficult to kind of convince people that you can write just about anything that you want to. You just have to keep plugging away at it. You have to keep making those portfolio pieces so that when an opportunity comes up, someone says, I'm making a game that's this genre, this gameplay, this kind of feel and tone. Can you do that? And your samples say, oh, actually, I can. There you go. And that's kind of what it's about. That's how you get out of it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have to be able to jump into IPs and existing IPs fairly easily and be able to just kind of go, yep, I can also do this as well. I mean, Samantha, you've jumped into things from Ubisoft, from Riot Games, as well as, is Adopt Me something more your own vision there as well? Or is that how many times have you got to shape the vision, do you think, as a freelancer walking into these things?
So definitely more on indie stuff. So Broken Roads, which was an indie project that I worked on for about 7 or 8 months. I came in as their narrative lead. So they're based in Australia, and they're making a really great, if you're into like classic RPGs and also really like films like Mad Max, then like it's basically like that's the mashup of the game they're making, which is really exciting. But I went in when they were still, pre-release basically, so pre-announcement, sorry. And I was working with them almost from the ground up. So I went in and, they had a good idea of what the story was, what the kind of characters they wanted, the feel of the world, the kind of the background of the world that they created. But I went in to help them build that, to help them build that out, make it more authentic. Build the characters a bit more, think about the relationships between them, think about the story arcs and things like that. So I think on a project like that, where you're in at that point and you're given that kind of that trust and responsibility to work together to build that, then you can absolutely shape things. And then I think on the other end of the scale is something like working for an Assassin's Creed as a scriptwriter, where it's very much you go in, you're given your block of stuff to do, and the creative direction is very clear on that. They already know who the characters are, how they've got there, what they're doing, what they want them to be doing, what kind of tone it is, what kind of style it is, what the gameplay is going to be. And you're very much there as a writer to be like, make this work narratively. Give us a good arc, get that branching in, get those foundations in. And so that from that point of view, like I don't think I've created anything that will add to the Assassin's Creed universe, because it's kind of already there. Whereas in Broken Roads, there's a lot of my kind of fingerprints in that, I suppose. So yeah, it depends on what IP you're working on, what kind of studio you're in, obviously what level you're in as well. Like a script writer versus a narrative lead, very clearly you're probably going to have different responsibilities and things there. But saying that as well, that there is always the opportunity to, obviously you're shaping smaller things, I suppose, rather than creating actual lore, perhaps, or original characters. There are still little ways in which you can affect stuff.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have probably had that question from the random person we meet at the pub of like, I've got a great idea for a game. Do you know which studio should I pitch it to? Go on, it's going to be a million seller. I know it is. It's like, okay, cool. If you've got a team to work on it with, no. Have you got an investment? No. But it's going to be a brilliant selling game. I don't want to tell it to you. You're going to steal it off me. No, mate, I'm not. Trust me. I'm really.
You gotta make it for me, yeah.
Yeah. And I think we've probably all got it. Everyone's laughing in recognition of this one across it. But yeah, and I think it is pretty much the experience of a lot of us that we go in, and you have to be flexible, ready to work on other people's vision. It's very rare that we really get the opportunity to walk in and shape something. And if you're a new writer coming into this, don't expect you're going to be able to walk into a studio and go, hey, I've got this great idea. That's not likely what's going to be happening. But they will listen, especially with smaller studios. You've got an original idea. Even if it's a bigger studio, typically you're going to have to prove yourself a little bit more. And then, do the pitches, do the quests they ask you to write. And you kind of go, I've got an idea for another one that I'd really love to tell this story. I think it would work really, really well. I see Kim's kind of nodding with experience or recognition over there. Is there something that you've had to do as well?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that it comes back to like the people who get to make the decision on the team. It really depends. For one thing, it's early. Like if you come in early, the amount of impact that you can have is very different. Like I know that even on like an Assassin's Creed, I came in, I think I was a year and a half ago, roughly. And so there are things that I got to kind of build up, and whether or not, all of them made it in, it's a different experience than I would have had ages ago when I came onto Assassin's Creed Syndicate, for example. It was very late game. At that point, it is that feeling of like, okay, you need to ship this, and I need to do what you need. But but then it also comes down to, no matter how much experience I have, even if I'm there for a year and a half, I might not be in the room where these decisions are made, and that can go in. That's not just AAA. In indie, sometimes you're like, you will not get any say. It really is for me a matter of like team composition and openness, and also like your own experience and knowing when to pitch that idea. Knowing how feasible the idea is a big thing. And I think that's why the guy at the pub who's like, I've got an idea, it might be a great idea, but is it feasible? Absolutely not. And he's drunk, so you don't have to listen to him.
It's usually annoying as well.
I think that's it. It's with time and experience, you know, beyond 1,000 other factors that we have to equalize first. Once you have time and experience, you get to know, like, oh, this cool idea I have, it's also cheap. And that, I think, is the education that lets you move your ideas forward a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of this kind of stuff, I mean, when people need to move between studios, I mean, how do you go about finding new work? How do you find new clients? We've talked a little bit about trying to find your first one, and things like game jams, engaging with the community, taking in different roles in this. So we've talked about kind of either going in through community management, through marketing, through level design, stuff like this. But imagine you've got a few things under your belt. And you've either been working freelance for one particular studio, you've had one big client, and maybe that game's wrapping up and they won't need any writing for a couple of years. How do you, well, we've got several freelancers here. How do you folks go about finding the next gig? How do you find work to keep yourself in the game? Maybe Samantha, you're nodding over there. Sorry to put you on the spot. That's a difficult one.
That's fine. So I'm still very early in my career. It's like 2 years ago, I was not game writing, although I was in the industry. And it has been really tough. Like, you know, I've managed to kind of do enough, and all of my writing, bar one, has been freelancing, which comes with obviously a degree of uncertainty. Some of it, you know, it's not always been full time. So I balance it. So I'm with Adopt Me at the moment, and I work as a producer there primarily. So, you know, I've managed, because of my background in project management and dev management, I'm lucky that I've got that other skill set that I can kind of fall back on, which it's both a good thing and a bad thing, because it means I've got a safety net. So, you know, if I absolutely can't find any writing work and I need to pay my bills for the next 3 months, then, you know, I can pick up a contract to produce, and it's all good. But at the same time, it gives me an easy out to not do the extra hard work about getting the next thing. And I think, I mean, for me, it's been a mix of, it's been networking. So it's definitely been reaching out to people, meeting people. And when I say networking, you know, I don't just mean handing out a business card at an event. I mean building genuine connections with people that you meet in the industry, that you feel a connection with, that you like their work, you like the way, you know, you like them as people. It's building genuine, authentic connections, because they're the ones that are then going to advocate for you for those roles that never make it to a website where you can, you know, click apply and do things like that. So I've got a couple of roles from that, just, you know, from people kind of knowing who I am, having worked with me before, not necessarily as a writer, but knowing that I'm a reliable person who can get the job done, and you know, you'd be happy to kind of bring it into a studio. And then you know, I've done stuff where I also apply for stuff that I see, you know, and I'm honestly, I think it's really important now to touch on the idea of rejection and things like that, because, like, even though, you know, I've worked on several different titles, probably 5 times as many that I've either just been rejected or just ignored. You know, it is often just like throwing yourself into a black hole. And I think that's where, as a new person or an early career person, it can be really demoralizing, because, you know, you're trying really hard, you're putting all this work into it, you're not always getting something back. And I think that's where that, you know, you just have to carry on going, because it maybe the first 99 aren't successful, maybe 100 is going to be the one for you. So I wish there was an easy answer, you know, because it would be great for me too if I could just say, you know, this way works 100% of the time and I'm going to be fine for the rest of my career. But sadly, you know, that's not the case. It's a case of being, like, you know, being active on Twitter and following the studios you're interested in. It's putting the effort into those professional relationships from an authentic point of view. It's being open to opportunity as well. Like, you know, my dream job would probably be writing a Fallout game for Bethesda. That's very unlikely to happen. And if I sit around and wait for that one perfect job to come along, I'm going to miss out on a lot of opportunity. Yeah. So it's very much, you know, I maybe we'll come to this in a later question, but the idea of freelancing as well, it's, for me, a lot of it was being comfortable with taking on the uncertainty. So, you know, the uncertainty of taking a 3-month contract, or maybe doing part-time work, and you know, knowing that I'm just going to have to be really careful with money for a short while.
Yeah, build that portfolio however you can, because all of that experience counts. And I think we've kind of said here that you can get a little bit typecast, but a lot of the time people understand experience is experience. And as Frankie was saying, stories about love. Every story in its way should be about love if it's a good story. That's at its heart there. Kim, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, I think that Samantha's point is really, really good. And it's something that we don't talk about a lot, which is that sometimes, especially, you know, with my company now, we've gotten to a point where we're just rolling along, right? And a lot of the jobs are just going to come from themselves, where you work with a studio, and especially because we're a team of people, it's a lot of people have worked with all of us, and we're kind of just going to roll onto different projects with different studios at different levels. But at the beginning, I think it's important, and not everyone can get to that point. You know, I've been in the industry about 7 years, and it took enough time. And then we've had this company for, this is our second year, we're doing well now. But at the beginning of it, I do wish that I'd had more experience and thought, oh, I can have a job that isn't this and also do this. It doesn't have to be always the goal of, I'm going to be a full-time games writer, and if I can't do that, I'm a failure of any kind. I think that, you know, if Samantha is writing on the same projects as me and also does production, that's great, that's incredible. Because then you're realizing like, oh, not only are you doing multiple jobs in the industry, but you're balancing it and you're able to take on the smaller jobs. Like, it can be a pleasure to work on a game that will only pay a couple $100, and it doesn't matter at what point in my career I'm at. If that project interests me, I want to be able to take it. And so it's about, especially for freelancing, it's about finding that mix. And I think that's one of the shames also a lot of the time of AAA, is that when I wish that they were more permissive about having people like do other things. Because I think, you know, it's this idea that like you have to throw yourself in entirely, otherwise you're not serious about it. It's like, no, you can tell your story, and if that story is small, and it's exactly as valid. And I think, yeah, I would really propose that to a lot of people. And as far as getting more jobs for me at this point, it really is just like having worked with a team, having gained the trust of that team, and then being around in a year when they say, hey, we're thinking about this. And it's also equally important for me, you know, because if I work on a project 2 years ago that right now I'm too busy for, I appreciate being able to say, no, but I did help this other person who has a great portfolio, who's working on a small project, and I can pass that on to them. So it's about sharing, it's about, and then that person in 5 years might call you back when they're a studio head of someplace. Like, the investment that you have to make in building community pays itself back, and it's how we all stay in it. It's the reason that it's worth diving into communities where there isn't necessarily a lot of like games stuff happening, and trying to bring them in.
Definitely pour out love into the world, because, you know, there's enough hatred out there as it is.
Exactly. It's why we're called, my company is called Sweet Baby, because when we started it, we used to work with clients, and whenever we would finish with someone who was nice, we're like, ah, what a sweet baby they are. And we just said, like, we just want to work with people who are sweet babies. We want to work with people we like, and with teams that we like. And, you know, it doesn't always work out. So it's sometimes you take the job and you're like, oh, these people aren't sweet, nor are they babies. But, you know, that project that you do might fund the other 3 projects that are. So it's finding a balance in the industry.
Yeah, and there's I want to swing back to portfolios at some point, because we've had a lot of questions about that, and I think it's something that a lot of people talk about, whether they're experienced TV writers or novelists who are thinking of moving across, people with years of writing in a different industry, or whether they're new to this industry completely and so new to writing. There's a lot of people asking things about portfolios, but I've had a great question from the brilliant name for anonymous attendee. When you're applying, are there any things in the application process that are red flags? We've talked about, you know, apply, it's great, network, things like this. They said like spec work, long application processes, etc. What's, okay, Kim, that you had the most emotional reaction to that. I was like, oh my God.
Oh no, I want to hand it to Giles first, because he got it there first, but I'll go after.
Giles, go for it, tell us.
Right, the biggest red flag is telling the studio that you hate their games. Or basically going in there and saying...
It's how to dismiss yourself, but we also want to know how to vet out the bad studios. But go for it on your side of it. What not to do on an application process?
Oh, what not to do on an application process? Yeah, just basically, if they ever ask for what are your thoughts on previous projects, never say, oh, it was terrible, I hated it. Here's every million way I could make it better. Always look at something that a team of people have made and think, right, chances are they probably, if something's not quite right, they probably are aware of that, and they probably wanted it to be right, but for various reasons it might not be, and they might be a bit sensitive about it. So maybe just try to find a sugar-coated way of saying, oh, you know, this bit didn't quite work for me.
I'd have gone in a different direction with that one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, yeah, that's great tips. Obviously, if you're going for an interview, be professional, respect the work they've done. Don't just come in and go, well, the story in your last one sucked, you need help. I have heard people say that stuff like that before, and they don't get the job, they don't get the work. Kim, you want to jump in of red flags when you're looking at studios or studios are asking you for work?
I think Giles's things is for sure very big, because I've seen that so many times. It's like, you screwed this up, you didn't do a good job, fortunately I'm here. And I think it's that attitude of entitlement and arrogance that shows inexperience. Yeah. Because as Giles says, it's like, chances are there were meetings about this. Chances are they didn't have the funding to do this. They didn't have the budget to do this. They didn't have the time to do this. But someone probably thought of it. And I think coming in and with the valid criticism is great. It's saying, here's what I think, but always make it more like about what you can bring to the team versus how they failed in the past. And I think the same person who's at the bar talking about their story sometimes applies. And they say, like, there's a sense of like, oh, I'm going to bring this. This is the story I want to tell, and making it about you, you know, and not making it about, you know, if you're coming in and you're going like, this franchise needs me, chances are it doesn't. And I think that, and I see a lot, and the reason that I kind of stressed Barks earlier in a portfolio is that, like, you don't want to just go, okay, I'm going to do cinematics, because what if the job is not that? What if they need someone who's more well-rounded than you? But I think a lot of people, especially a lot of people coming in from like different industries like film or TV, kind of go like, well, I'm already good at this, here you go, I'm going to run things differently now. And to me, that is the biggest red flag, because it just says, I'm not going to be collaborative. I'm going to come in and try to fix things that are broken instead of hearing what you need from me. And I think remembering that you're going to be part of a team is so important. And it's the reason that, like, when you come in, having auteurs in the industry a lot of the time is a bad thing. It's someone who goes, this is my game, and I don't ever want that. That's never appealing to me. And coming in with that same energy, even before you've made anything, is even worse. And I think those are the people we don't have to idolize. Those are the people we have to not emulate. We want to be collaborative, we want to be teammates, and we want to do something that, think of it as like a project of all times, I think, is the advice that I would give. And don't come in expecting to own everything or change everything.
Yeah, definitely. And if your team kind of, also if your team's sitting there kind of going, well, you know, just make something up, that also makes me not want to work with them. You know, if they've got no vision for me to listen to and nothing for me to add to, that's, I've got to be in the right place to kind of go, yeah, okay, all right. This does go both ways. If you do start picking up an intuition of like, these people, they don't understand this, they don't want this, think carefully about whether you want to get in that situation. Be careful with that stuff. We have 6 minutes left, and I'm told by Andy that this thing will cut off pretty much. This will pretty much self-destruct like the Mission Impossible guideline at 6 minutes. So we've had a lot of questions about portfolios. We've had a lot of questions about Barks. So one of the thick questions we had is, how do you present Barks in a portfolio? My personal preference would be to say, you always want to show how things are going to be triggered. So, you know, if you want to say, player is dark elf and they are at 10% of health, give you 20 versions of 10% more health. You know, person has found their true love, again, for the 50th time this game. You know, how many Barks can you put for finding true love? These are the kind of things I think people would look at in this kind of thing. So tying things up to the trigger conditions. Trigger conditions of people who might be new. A trigger is what makes that line play in the game as a person is playing it. And in spreadsheets, we often have, sometimes it can be like 4 or 5, like players at 50% of health. They previously attacked the orc. They have been romancing Rowena. They've also been romancing Giles, why not? And then they are hitting the knee by an arrow. What dialogue do they say at this point? You know, you know, we get quite a lot of trigger things in there. That's some of the stuff you can do as kind of portfolio material. What else, folks, would you want to see in a portfolio? If you, as you know, Frankie, if you're somebody asked about they wanted to work on your team of Love Island, what would you want to see in a portfolio when somebody applies to you? What do you look for?
I'd say something that demonstrates an ability with character dialogue. and just a sort of natural affinity with kind of how people speak, and bearing in mind like these are going to be words that's going to be written on a mobile. So yeah, something with character dialogue would be great, whether it's in a script or in a Twine game. An understanding of that is really lovely. Likewise, an understanding of something that just shows a little bit of relationships going on. That's sort of what we look for. And I always really like there to be like a sort of a passion piece, like something that someone's just really kind of like pleased with. It can be in any genre and anything, but just something that you're really like, that you could just talk to the end of the earth about, like something that shows off that you really love writing, because at the end of the day, we want you to enjoy what you're doing every day.
Is there anything that would really put you off if you saw in a portfolio?
Something that similar to actually what Kyle said, is like something that's like sort of dismissive of the tone of like what we're working on. I think that's like just kind of like, obviously I don't want to say like just doesn't like respect it, but I guess yeah, just something that just sort of like takes the mick out of it. That would be like a no to me. That would be like, nah. Just to meet the tone, meet the I really liked what you said Samantha earlier about like meeting the tone of a studio, and I think you can gauge quite a lot on what a studio kind of like aims by looking at their website, looking at what their values are, and that's a really important way to kind of like frame your portfolio in terms of matching that tone.
Thank you, everybody. We are going to have to start wrapping up here because we've got a couple of minutes left, and I am sure we've got a few. Either Andy, you can jump in to do some announcements, but while Andy's suddenly being shocked about being asked to talk, I want to remind you that there are going to be another 4 talks this week. We've had some brilliant people, and in case I get cut off, thank you so much, Kim, Samantha, Frankie, and Giles for joining us tonight. It's been really, really interesting. Please do join in with the survey that's available there. If you're a writer or if you're just new to the industry, we would love to have your participation on that survey. You can register on Eventbrite for the other ones. I believe there are still tickets available for those others, and that would be useful. Andy, anything you want to add for the next 2 minutes? While he finds the unmute button.
It is always finding the unmute button. I would like to take the opportunity to say, wherever you are in the world listening to us today, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy days and careers to come and join us. Please do put your hands together, stamp on the floor, whatever won't annoy the neighbours, and we will hear you to thank the panellists for their thoughts and contributions. I have learned a lot tonight from listening to everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm going away feeling invigorated as well. Please do join us for the rest of the panels. Please do think about joining the guild so that we can help you help the industry. And as a first step towards that, there's the survey up there and the survey from Fusebox as well. You will be getting an email with links to those shortly after this. And I will hand you back to Matta to finish.
Yeah, thank you everybody for doing all this. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to the literally hundreds of questions I've had scrolling past here for the entire time. I'm so pleased to see everybody so passionate. Thank you everybody for joining in. I hope you enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you once again, Samantha, Frankie, Giles, Kim. I think this is probably going to be the end of it all, but brilliant to talk with you. Best of luck to everybody who is jumping into this industry. We need all your voices in here. We need to hear from different kinds of people. If you are coming from a difficult background, women minorities particularly, but everybody, I want you to know, beyond class, religion, sexuality and gender, there is a place in games for you. There are people out there who are great to work with. We do want you to work on our teams. Come join in, it'll be great. Come make this place better for all of us. We just want to make some great games, tell some great stories. Welcome. Enjoy, and I hope this has helped some of you take a step forwards. Join the Writers Guild, we're fantastic people, I guess. Thank you, everybody.
And do throw questions at us on Twitter if we didn't get to them this time.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, we're on Twitter.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, my DMs are open, or I'm happy to answer any more questions that didn't get to.
Yeah, shout out. Definitely. You can Google all of us. I think we're all fairly easy to find on Twitter. Yeah. Cool.
And I'll also just say thank you again to Fusebox for sponsoring all of the events. Thank you very much.
Fusebox, fantastic. Love Island games, go download them. They're a lot of fun. They've got a bisexual woman in it with freckles, and everybody exploded on Twitter with delight about that. Right, everybody, have a lovely evening. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Good night. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Mm-hmm.